You go check, make sure my penis isn't retracting. The brain is a complex and wondrous organ, except for your brain, Peter. It's shit. There are 100 billion neurons making 100 trillion connections, and this processing power allows for all sorts of human ingenuity and creativity. It's so complicated that scientists don't really know a whole lot about the brain and how it works. Sure, we figured out a bunch of stuff, but it's far eclipsed by the amount of things we don't understand about the human brain. But one thing we do know is that when you're building an intricate device with 100 trillion wires, it's pretty easy for some of those to get crossed. And this can result in all sorts of psychological disorders, ranging from the mildly inconvenient to the completely debilitating. There are plenty of severe conditions that are commonly known, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, dissociative identity disorder, which may or may not be real. However, there are plenty of lesser-known disorders as well. These are typically so rare that you simply never hear about them. But they are also so out of line with the average person's experience that it's difficult to comprehend that they could even be real. And that's what we're talking about today. By the way, if you're new here, welcome to the show. The format is Kevin writes this. I've never read it before. We're going to explore together. It's going to be fun, Peter. Clinical Lycanthropy. For fans of The Casual Criminalist, that's another show that I do, it's also a podcast, check it out, they may recognize this phrase as one of the episodes featured a killer who was assessed as suffering from clinical lycanthropy. I literally made that episode and I have no recollection of this. He certainly didn't suffer as much as his victims did, but this condition doesn't make it sound like a lot of fun either. While it doesn't explicitly have its own entry in the DSM, clinical lycanthropy is considered a subtype of delusional disorder, a type of psychotic disorder. In this case, the delusion is that the person is either a wolf, is turning into a wolf, or can transform between wolf and human, be it at will or involuntarily. This is one of those ones where you're like, yeah, I mean, you can believe that, but have you ever actually turned into a wolf? And they'll be like, nah, but I can. And it's like, you don't see the problem with that? Turn into a wolf right now? No, I don't want to. Can you imagine the psychiatrist is just like, good. So can you turn into a wolf? No, I guess not. And they leave. Lycanthropy solved. That's how it's generally described anyway, but the animal the person believes they can turn into doesn't have to be a wolf. In fact, of the 60 reported cases, less than half of those with clinical lycanthropy believe they turned into wolves or dogs. They might be a snake, a hyena, a bird, or in one case, even a bee. The important... I'm sorry, I don't want to laugh at people's psychological disorders, but it's like, what's wrong there? Yeah, I believe I can turn into a bee at will. That's a weird thing to believe. I know. I wouldn't believe it myself if I did occasionally turn into a bee.
No.
The important thing is that they honestly believe that they are or can become whatever the chosen animal is. Is this like an episode of like Animagrophs or whatever? Animagrophs? There's a book series about kids who think they can turn into Animorphs! And I think there was a TV show as well. This isn't your typical Tumblr otherkin who just think it would be fun to be half elf or something. This is a genuine psychotic delusion accompanied by behaviors indicative of whatever animal the person thinks they are. For as rare as this particular delusion is, and as few properly documented cases there seem to have been, there seems to be a great deal of historical precedent. There are potential references to the condition in the Old Testament of the Bible and the Odyssey, as well as numerous historical figures that presented symptoms consistent with clinical lycanthropy. For example, Bayard Prince Majid al-Dawa is believed to as having delusions that he was a cow before being cured by a doctor and philosopher Ibn Sina. All of these stories are anecdotal and differ somewhat, but it seems that the doctor's approach to curing the prince was essentially a form of talk therapy, forcing him to utilize and then acknowledge that he utilized a level of human reasoning far exceeding what a cow would be capable of. Wait, so the doctor was like, ever turned into a cow? Lycanthropy solved! So basically, the cure was to make the prince realize he was smarter than a dumb old cow. And to an extent, that sort of treatment is still used today. Not necessarily that specific tactic, as it could easily become quite confrontational, but psychotherapy does remain one of the tools for combating clinical lycanthropy. I don't feel like there would be drugs for this one. Or maybe they have some like antipsychotic drugs or something that could sort this out. It feels like really specific to have a drug for, though. But the much more effective tool is drugs, okay? Really strong drugs. Antipsychotics have been proven to be quite effective at treating the condition, sometimes coupled with antidepressants or mood stabilizers, depending on other underlying conditions that may exist. However, the hardest part of treating clinical lycanthropy is identifying that a person is suffering from the delusion. Essentially, the only options are to witness the person in a fit where they are acting like an animal, or you need them to be lucid enough to be able to describe their previous delusions, assuming they even remember them. Fortunately, even without knowing that they specifically believe they are turning into a wolf or other animal, it may be possible to identify the person as being psychotic and delusional, and thus get them the necessary antipsychotic medication. There is an even rarer condition named, good lord, lycanthropic intermetamorphosis. That's a hell of a mouthful, in which the person suffering from the delusion believes that it is not they who are transforming into animals, but the people around them are. But there's an even more interesting disorder in which a person thinks the people around them have changed. And that's the next entry, Capgras Syndrome. Now, you're probably familiar with the concept of face blindness, where somebody is unable to recognize other people by their faces. However, in studying face blindness, researchers determined that the brain has two different pathways by which it recognizes people, one conscious and one unconscious. Even though there was a lack of conscious recognition in people with this condition, their bodies might still show the same autonomic responses you would expect from a familiar person. Or in simpler terms, a face-blind person can't identify a close friend by looking at their face, but they would still feel warm fuzzies when they see them. That is weird. The subconscious is incredible, right? You're like, I don't recognize this person, medically incapable of recognizing this person, but I know them and I like them. What if you came across an enemy? Would you be like, oh, I don't know who you are, but I don't like you?
Wait a minute. Who are you?
So what happens when those things are reversed, especially if it suddenly occurs later in life? You can clearly identify the people around you, but the warm feelings they once gave you are all gone. They still look like the same person, but something just feels off. This is what some researchers believe is happening in those suffering from Capgras Syndrome, a syndrome in which people believe that their loved ones have been replaced. I'm familiar with this because I definitely made a video about this before. It's creepy. It gives me the shivers. It's named after French psychiatrist Joseph Capgras, who believed it was a symptom of female hysteria and called it the doppelganger illusion, but in French. I wish that term stuck because it's honestly a way cooler name. For those suffering from Capgras Syndrome, the delusion that family or friends have been replaced with imposters is seemingly unbreakable. It's not necessarily all friends and family, and it may be restricted to a single person. In a case from 1991, a 74-year-old housewife became convinced that her husband had been replaced with an imposter, but she didn't have this same feeling about the rest of her family. In that case, you'd be like, well, let's just double check to make sure he hasn't been replaced by like a robot. Let's just cut him and see if he bleeds.
Tell me. Do you bleed?
Unfortunately, this extreme level of paranoia can sometimes lead to either violence or self-harm. The woman in the previous case would lock herself in her room at night, refusing to share a bed with her husband, and she requested that her son get her a gun. Be like, why do you need a gun, Mum? Oh, it's like, well, I think your dad's been replaced with a robot and I want to protect myself. Yeah, Mum, get in the car. We're gonna go to the gun store, Mum. Driving you straight to the hospital. While that case fortunately didn't end in violence, others have. So, what exactly causes Capgras syndrome? I mentioned the mechanism in the brain that is speculated to be malfunctioning in those with the condition, but how can that suddenly happen to a person later in life? Despite not being terribly well understood because of how rare the condition is, we do actually have a pretty good idea what causes it. Capgras is a neurological condition primarily caused by brain damage or degeneration. That means that if you undergo some sort of trauma resulting in lesions on your brain, or you develop Alzheimer's or dementia, well, that could lead you winding up to also suffering from Capgras. If you also happen to be schizophrenic already, that causes a sharp increase in the likelihood of developing Capgras syndrome as well. But because the condition is so rare, there isn't really any course of treatment that has been shown to be effective at combating it. The best doctors can hope to do is treat the other underlying conditions that may be contributing factors like schizophrenia or dementia in the hopes that this delusion goes away as well. Alien hand syndrome. Alien hand syndrome is another rare condition caused by damage to the brain. In this case, it could be caused by trauma, strokes, degenerative brain diseases, or once upon a time by surgery. Holy shit. Oh, wait, I know this one. This is where your hand just does shit that you don't want it to do. And there's the corpus callosum. Why do I know what that's called? The thing that joins the two halves of your brain together. If that's cut, then apparently, that can happen. Right? The first documented case of AHS was written about in 1908 by German psychiatrist Kurt Goldstein. Despite being an extremely rare condition, there was a sudden increase of cases in the following decades thanks to the treatment of epilepsy. A common treatment for those suffering from severe epilepsy was to sever the corpus callosum. God, I've got a big double brain. Separating the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Fixing the brain by slicing it in half does sound really weird, but it's honestly pretty cool, and it led to some important research on how the brain works. It also, how did they figure this out though? They'd be like back in the day being like, yeah, if we cut the brain in half, that person doesn't have epilepsy anymore. Who's the first person to be like, yeah, I guess I'll have my brain cut in half. Why the fuck not? Give it a shot. Get in there.
That's it, mister. You just lost your brain privileges.
It also gave rise to the whole left brain versus right brain myth, which is less cool, but these things happen. Anyway, this treatment did work to treat epilepsy, but AHS was sometimes an unwanted side effect. After surgery, some patients noticed that their weak hands began acting on their own, or at least others noticed that it was happening. Depending on how severe the case is, people with AHS may be oblivious to the fact that the hand is doing anything. In fact, the first case described by Goldstein was a recovering stroke victim that he was seeing. He observed the behavior of the alien hand in his office, although the woman had no idea her hand was doing anything. Of course, not all sufferers of AHS are oblivious to the actions of their hand. Some will watch their hand do things that they actively don't want it to do, and in the case of damage to the corpus callosum, the hand often acts in direct defiance to what the person is trying to do. That's got to be really annoying and very dangerous if you're driving. Someone with AHS might try to button their shirt with their dominant hand while their weak hand unbuttons it, or they could open up a drawer with one hand while the other hand closes it. And in severe cases, the misbehaving hand might try to straight up murder its owner by wrapping itself around the neck and refusing to acknowledge their safe word. Of course, this sort of behavior is generally restricted to when there is damage to the corpus callosum. Damaging different areas of the brain can cause the alien hand to behave in different ways. Brain is weird, isn't it? This is just absolutely nuts. When the damage occurs in the frontal lobe, AHS is more likely to affect the dominant hand, and it involves a whole lot of groping. Not necessarily groping of other people, though I can't rule that out, just groping of things in general. If something is within the arm's reach, the alien hand is going to grab it. And just like a clingy ex, it also has a hard time letting go. That's probably for the best, though, and picking up one random object and refusing to drop it seems preferable to it grabbing and throwing everything inside like a petulant toddler. The third variant of AHS happens when the damage is centered in the posterior of the brain. While all sufferers of AHS lack the ability to control their rogue limb, it is those with the third type of brain damage that are most likely to view their hand as being a separate entity entirely.
You should meet my brother. He's a little crazy.
This is because the posterior parietal cortex plays a large role in our sense of self, so damage to this area, resulting in uncontrolled movements, can make the sufferer feel as though the hand is no longer a part of their self. This version of AHS, again, affects the weak hand rather than the dominant, and people with this version of the condition will often name their hand, treating it like a separate entity entirely. They could also scold it for misdeeds, though, when the damage is in the back of the brain, the rogue hand is less likely to cause trouble. Rather than randomly grabbing onto objects or people, these alien hands will actively avoid contact with surfaces. The arm will often extend outward with the palm tilted backward so the fingers can guard it from touching anything. The hands will also often be described as levitating as it extends upward to avoid tables or anything else that might get in its way. So, how do we treat this? Well, they say the devil makes work for idle hands, and there is at least one report of an alien hand undressing a stranger. Can you imagine this legal defense? You're just in court. It's like, so defendant groper, you're accused of groping 70 women over the course of 2 years. And the dude's just like, I can't help it. It's an alien hand syndrome. There's a joke there. It's better. Mine was bad, but there's something there.
No.
In order to best ward off Satan, the ideal course of action is to keep the alien hands busy. This usually involves carrying a cane or a fidget spinner, or really anything else that it can grab onto, as AHS rarely results in the hands releasing their grasp of one item to grope something else. Some patients will also limit the hands' utility by wearing things like oven mitts. There are also reports of people tying their hands to something like a bedpost. This is effective, but rather counterproductive. And finally, another way to control an alien hand is to look at it and yell, "Hey, stop around, you evil hands." Wait. Okay, the yelling part isn't actually necessary, but maintaining visual contact with the alien hand can help prevent it from taking involuntary actions. The brain is crazy! Be like, stop it. What? While there is no cure for AHS, it's often only temporary. Temporary, in this case, maybe several years, but oh no, that's not the doctor. Good news, it's temporary. And you're like, oh, that's nice. So when will it stop doing it? A couple of days, next week? And the doctor's like, oh, years. You'd be like, you gave me hope, Doc, and then you took it away, you bastard. Sorry, it was my alien hand. Our brains are resilient machines, and when parts of the brain are damaged, it will often rewire itself in order to restore functionality. This is why simply tying up the hand completely is counterproductive, as it will make the healing process more lengthy. But through a combination of keeping the alien hand occupied so it can't get into trouble and dedicated training to force it to do what you want, the brain can eventually return full conscious control of the alien hand to a person. That's cool. Koro. Koro is a very strange psychological condition, not to be confused with the prion disease Kuru or the village of Kakiri. Yeah, Kuru's f***ed up, and prion diseases are terrifying. Like, the problem with like prions, they cause like proteins to fold badly and they just absolutely kill you and there's no cure. It's like what BSE is, mad cow disease. Though cases of Koro have existed worldwide, it is officially classified as a culture-bound disease, as epidemics have disproportionately affected Asians, particularly Chinese. So what exactly is Koro, you ask? Well, it's often described as being a panic disorder, especially because of how it begins. If you ever had a panic attack, my condolences, because they suck. Yeah, I've had one panic attack in my life when I smoked too much weed, and it was extremely unpleasant, and never had it again. I felt like, it's like, oh no, this is it, I'm gonna die. It's like, no, oh, this is a panic attack. And then you're like, is it? Is it? And then I was fine. But it was like extremely unpleasant and has never happened since. But unless your attack was triggered by a specific and intense phobia, there's a good chance that it wasn't triggered by or about anything at all. Except for weed, Kevin. Smoking too much weed. Panic attacks are an intense and overwhelming sense of anxiety, coupled with a dramatically accelerated heart rate and possible disorientation. But more often than not, this feeling of intense anxiety isn't related to anything in particular. Now, I want you to take that same sensation, except this time, all-consuming anxiety is focused on something very specific. Your penis. You're having a panic attack about your penis? What?
Our daddy taught us not to be ashamed of our dicks, especially since they're such good size and all.
Koro begins essentially as a panic attack in which the sufferer is 100% convinced that their penis is shrinking. It's shrinking, it's retracting into their body, and unless they can stop it, it's going to fully retract and kill them. What the f*** is this disease? This sounds like it's some made-up thing in a dream. In Western society, this condition is commonly referred to as genital retraction syndrome or simply penis shrinking. After the initial panic attack subsides, the fear that the penis tree is shrinking does not. Sufferers may try to pull and stretch their penis, clamp it into place, or build elaborate contraptions to prevent their penis from fully retracting into their bodies, often causing themselves serious injury or even death. Women can suffer from Koro as well, although in their case the fear is that the nipples are retracting into their breasts. How have I never heard of this? It's truly wild. Fun fact, between 2 and 10% of adults have inverted nipples.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more! Where the f*** are your parents?
What's most interesting about this condition is the wide variety of causes. Though I mentioned it's classified as being culturally bound and has historically affected Asians more, in this case, culturally bound refers to the prevalence of various superstitions in different cultures. Outbreaks of shrinking penis spread across Africa, where there were fears that penises would be stolen by practitioners of the occult. And they spread across medieval Europe due to fears that witches were going to make penises retract. This is like a weird fever dream. What's going on? Because what else are witches going to do with their time? But the cultural causes aren't strictly limited to magical bullshit. Men have also begun suffering from Koro due to fears of sexual inadequacy, guilt over masturbation or promiscuity, or shame felt due to impotence. However, how likely it is for any specific aspect to be related to a case of Koro is dependent on the cultural and societal norms of the area. The only real geographic differences in cases of Koro is the fear of death. I haven't found any specific reason for this, but for those suffering from Koro in Asia, they tend to believe that their penis retracting into their bodies is going to kill them, and this hasn't been the case in the rest of the world. The good news is that there are plenty of treatments available for those suffering from Koro. The first course of treatment is to give the penis a good inspection and make sure that it isn't actually retracting or abnormally formed. It's pretty rare that this would ever be the case, but it is a possibility, so it's better to make sure that the person actually isn't going insane first. You go check, make sure my penis isn't retracting. Beyond that, the course of treatment varies depending on where you live. For those in the US, the main course of treatment is psychotherapy. Reassurance that nothing is happening and education on how sexual anatomy actually works are beneficial as well. Sometimes antidepressants and antipsychotics will be administered. It's like, so why are you taking antidepressants? It's like, oh, I think my penis is going inside my body and is going to kill me. You'd be like, no, depression. It's not the penis thing.
Huge whopping penis. Wow, sorry to disappoint. But my huge whopping penis is right here.
Though this is usually only if there is another underlying psychological condition believed to be the root cause of Koro. But if you live in China, treatment is very much different. Common treatments include magical herbs, potions. Right, prescription for potion. And exercising the demon spirits that may be inhabiting your penis. You know, the typical reliable forms of medical treatments. Joking aside, though, all these treatments seem to be equally effective. Yeah, like psychological disorders and stuff, like they got the best shot of being treated with placebos, right? Like 100% believe real medication is going to work a whole lot better. But, you know, it's not like your broken leg's going to be cured with a placebo. And what were you really expecting? A different result? This isn't a medical condition where the person's penis is actually shrinking. They have a crippling fear that it is. This means you don't need fancy pharmaceuticals to stop it from shrinking. You just need to make the person stop thinking that it is. So if a universally accepted part of your culture is that magic is real, then why wouldn't an allegedly magic potion designed to restore your virility make you feel better? Like we've said many times, your brain is weird. And thanks for watching. Gonna go check on my cock. I know. I wouldn't believe it myself if I didn't occasionally turn into a bee.
No.